Good evening and welcome to Be Informed. My name is Carl Buhariwala and I founded Be Informed to help people make good decisions. Today we're looking at the topic of Australian migration, and joining us today is Hussein of Tohme Lawyers, who'll be speaking to you about skilled worker migration to Australia. This session is being recorded, so if you do have to leave early, you can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel later today. And the session is based on the Australian legal framework. So if you are joining us today from a jurisdiction outside of Australia, please bear in mind this is all in relation to employers of businesses seeking skilled workers from outside of Australia to migrate to Australia for the purposes of gainful employment. So that's the nature of today's session. Contents of today's session is sort of current as of today, and Gunnar has also prepared a one-page handout, which I'll share with registered participants following today's session. So you have a handy copy available with you, which has some important information that is being shared in today's session. So today's session will run with about 25 minutes of seminar that Gunnar will present, after which we'll go into Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can send them through to me in the chat function. Otherwise, I'll go through some of the questions that I've received ahead of time, and we'll see how we go. So with all that in mind, Gunnar, I'll hand over to you, and we can proceed with the seminar.
Excellent. Yep, sounds good. All right. So just as Carl mentioned, today's session is generally information only and not legal advice. I'm not acting as a solicitor. If you need advice about your personal situation, you should speak with a qualified lawyer at a law firm or a migration agency. All right. So tonight we're going to discuss work visas, which is basically, in a nutshell, where an employer requires to hire an employee, just can't find the right labour in Australia, or there's a shortage of labour in Australia, and they are forced to seek labour from overseas workers. This could be people who are currently residing overseas and have the skill sets to fill in that particular role and obtain a visa based on that. Or it could be that the person is already here in Australia and would like to move into that workplace, or the employer would like to hire him and they want to apply for that visa onshore as well. A standard business sponsor is a government-approved Australian entity authorised to sponsor skilled overseas workers for visas. So basically, an employer in Australia or a business in Australia, before they can hire an overseas worker, they first have to be approved by the Department of Home Affairs that they are a standard business sponsor. There's a few requirements that the employer must meet, such as being a legitimate business and is legitimately functioning in Australia, has all their paperwork in place that a business requires to have, and obviously does all the requirements it needs to do as a business towards the Australian government. Before an Australian employer can hire a candidate seeking employment, the employing entity must be vetted, which the Australian Department of Home Affairs basically does. So it's a separate application that the employer has to put through to the department, get that approved. Once it's approved, it's usually a 5-year tenure where the sponsors, the employers are sponsored for 5 years, and in that time frame, they can employ overseas workers. All right, so we can flick to the next slide. So the next thing that I guess an employer and the employee must consider is the occupation that they're looking for, that they want to fill within their within the workplace. Is it something that the government approves? Um, there's like a list of occupations that the government has that allows Australian workplaces to hire for those particular occupations. So you can't just hire someone for any occupation. The government set a list of different occupations that it believes has a shortage in Australia, and that the government would like those roles to be filled, because there's not enough workers in Australia to fill those. So the employer must ensure the role fits within the skills in demand framework, and to do that, there's an occupation list. There's two tiers. There's a two-tier system with the work visas. There's the specialist skill stream, which is based on the income that you earn, right? So as you can see, the income threshold for a specialist skill stream is $141,120, which means that if a worker's position is that amount of salary or more, then the workplace can hire an employee in any occupation. So there's no limit as to which occupation the standard business sponsor can hire an overseas worker. However, if they are under this salary, then they fall under the second tier of the work visa, which is the core skills occupation list, the core skills stream. So then, if they fall within the income bracket, which is anywhere between, which we'll come to that anyway, it's between roughly 76,000 to the $141,000, then the occupation must be on that list. So that's something that both it's the employer's duty to know that, and make sure that the person that they're hiring, or the role that they're looking for an overseas worker for, is within that list. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Right, so this applies to every single application for a work visa. One of the requirements is that the employer must pay the same amount of salary to the overseas worker that they would pay to an Australian worker. And how the Australian government has determined that is they've set a minimum wage that the employer can nominate the employee for. So it has to be a position that will pay at least $76,515 base salary, which means it excludes superannuation. So if that is not the market rate for that particular position for an employee for an X number of years of experience, for instance, then you can't sponsor that employee, or the employee can't apply for that visa, because most likely that application will fail. Coming to applications though, so we talked about the sponsorship application that the employer does to be recognized or to have the status to be able to sponsor. There's two other applications that must be done so that an employee gets a work visa. The second one is called a nomination application, and this income requirement is part of that. So the workplace has to satisfy the Department of Home Affairs that this position that they're nominating for the employee is a genuine one, and it meets the criteria for a nomination. And these are the sort of criteria that the government's put. So a person that earns at least $76,000 is a genuine position for an overseas employee. And then there's the visa application, which we'll talk about a little bit later, where the employee must be eligible to certain criteria as well for the work visa. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. All right, so the next step is proving that the position is genuine. Now, for that, I can give you an example that I had once upon a time when I was representing a client. Basically, it was a cleaning business, and they had a number of employees, probably roughly around 5 or 6 employees, and they wanted to hire a marketing specialist or marketing manager. Now, what the department does is they look to see whether the occupation you're trying to hire the employee for makes commercial sense for the type of business that it is. Basically, you wouldn't hire a manager if you're a small business, because a manager usually will manage a team of people. And if, for instance, your business is only making, let's say, $400,000 or $500,000, and you're trying to hire a marketing manager, that's not going to make sense, because the budget you will have for marketing will be very small, because your turnover or the revenue that the business is generating is not that much, because most of that will probably go to expenses, salaries, expenses running the business, and you'll only have so much for that. And then plus you have to pay this marketing manager, for instance, it's got to be over $76,000, probably $100,000. Probably won't have, the department won't believe you'll have enough for that, and let alone have salaries for people that are going to work underneath him. So the occupation has to make sense. Another example could be like you hire a engineer for a restaurant. That doesn't make sense. There's not gonna be enough work for the engineer to do that the restaurant will provide. So these are the things that determine whether a position is genuine or not. Another thing that the department looks at is they look at if there's any relationship between the business and the worker. Like if, let's say, one of the directors is a relative to the employee, this could raise concerns as well, and the department will do their due diligence. So yeah, this is something that the employer would have to think about. It's not necessarily something that the employee needs to know or needs to figure out. But the thing with immigration is it's still, the burden is on you as the applicant to make sure that the lawyer or agent is giving you proper advice, or the employer is doing what they're supposed to be doing and getting the proper advice. Because at the end of the day, you can't give the reason or the excuse that I received incompetent advice from, I didn't receive proper advice. Usually the department or the tribunal will say, well, that's unfortunately on your responsibility to make sure it's correct. So in other words, it's good to try to get some understanding of how these things work, so that you can keep a tab on, your employer, your boss, or the agent to make sure that they're doing the best that they possibly can. If you see in that diagram as well, some of the documentation we do also provide to prove that the position is genuine is like I'll get the lawyer or agent will get the business to provide an organizational chart to map out what the structure of the organization is and why they need that particular occupation and how it fits in the whole scheme of the business. They look at the employment contract, obviously, see how much that particular person is going to be earning, what the job description is to see if it actually looks like an engineering position, for instance, or a chef position or whatever the occupation is. And the job description. So one thing that an employer is obliged to do is to make sure that that particular employee is working and doing the things that that occupation requires it. And a website you can even go onto that's quite easy to navigate and has some good information is what we call ANZCO, so ANZCO, which stands for Australian New Zealand. I think I can't remember the C, but it's an occupation. It's a Bureau of Statistics, Bureau of Statistics, the information that the government provides about the different occupations that exist and what ideally the job description should be for each occupation, what that person should be doing in that occupation, basically. That's about it with that slide. We can move to the next slide. Okay. Now this one is probably more important for the employer, and that is that when during and post work visa application, the employer has responsibilities to, in certain situation, disclose information to the Department of Home Affairs. These usually are when the for instance, you change your mind in terms of what the employer will be doing for the business. So if that's the case, you have to, generally speaking, apply for a new nomination application for the government to approve that particular position. So you have to, again, prove the genuineness of that position. So in that case, you need to follow that process. If any details of the business changes, if there's a restructuring, or if there's a change of address or whatnot, then usually the employer will have to provide this information as soon as they can. It's usually a time period of 28 days. Another thing the department must do is they need to keep records of everything about the employee. These include, for instance, pay slips, how much you're paying the employee on a monthly basis, for instance. And if there's any equivalent worker in your workplace, keeping their contracts to show that the terms and conditions of their employment is the same. The written contract of employment with you and the employer. And also another interesting obligation for the employer is if the employee's visa ends and they need to leave Australia, it's the employer's responsibility duty to pay for their travel costs. So if there is an audit by the department in relation to whether the employer meets their obligations or not. You've got to have some sort of paper trail there to prove that you've done that. Yeah, and another thing is sometimes some employers actually just can't afford the employee, and they may be tempted to get the employee to pay for the fees associated with this application. It's quite clear, according to the immigration legislation, that the employer needs to bear these costs. So, in no shape or form can the employer put this cost burden onto the employee or receive any money or refund, or cut any money from the employee to pay for these fees. So the business needs to assume all the costs associated with it. And yeah, so these are crucial, obviously, for the employee as well, to make sure that the employer is on top of this so that it doesn't affect your visa. Just probably quickly, another thing I probably would be interested for listeners who want to apply for the visa is what is the criteria for work visas, for the visa application itself. Just very quickly, being conscious of time, go through it as well, just for information. But before I do, these applications, can affect your, if the employer doesn't follow through, it can affect your visa, and it can also result in hefty fines, sponsorship suspensions, and cancellations for the employer as well. Just quickly, just so for my reference, just pulling up the eligibility criteria for the work visa. One is that if you want to permanently stay in Australia, usually speaking with all type of visas, you need to be under 45. The temporary work visa, there's no particular age, but for the permanent work visa, if you want to eventually get to that, you need to do it before 45. There are some rare exceptions, but it's usually for a small amount of people, which probably no need to go through at this stage. Another thing is you got to have a current visa to apply for the work visa if you're in Australia. That's something to keep in mind, or there's particular bridging visas that allow you to apply for the work visa if you're on it. The department looks at your visa history as well to make sure that you've met your visa conditions in the past. Obviously you need to be nominated by an approved sponsor. So just when an employer comes to you and you are negotiating employment, just make sure that they're aware of the process, and they've either are a sponsor or are in the process of becoming a sponsor. So at least how long it may take for them to get you on board. You'd ideally want to join the employer once everything's approved. In particular, the nomination application is approved. Because without the nomination application being approved, you can't really work. And if your current visa, when you apply, doesn't have the necessary work rights, then you will have to also wait for your work visa to finalize as well, so that you can jump on board. Obviously, you got to make sure that if you sort of like come into an arrangement with the employer, it's like I just need a work visa. just come up with something for me. Probably most likely you don't have the relevant work experience in that occupation. So just make sure that you're actually applying for something where you got work experience and you can demonstrate it, or you got qualifications around it. Because one of the requirements is that you need to have at least 1 year of work experience in that nominated occupation or field, so that you can be successful in obtaining this visa application. Another step may be for some occupations that they require what we call a positive skills assessment, which is basically there's certain authorities that look at your work experience overseas and your qualifications and see if the skill level and the knowledge level is equivalent to the standards that Australia expects from that worker. So this is not for all occupations, but for some occupations, you've got to be aware that you might have to do first get a positive skills assessment before you can apply. So that's why it's good to try to map these out with your lawyer or migration agent as early as possible, so that if there's certain loopholes that you need to jump over, you have the necessary time, because the deadlines can be very tight with the deadlines are quite strict with when it comes to visa applications and immigration. You have health insurance, that's not too difficult. As long as you can apply and pay the amount for it, then you'll have you'll get that done. And then, like with any other visa, you got to make sure you meet the health requirement, which you can prove you don't have any health risks or conditions that can cause a risk to the Australian community, or be a burden on the health system. And you meet the character requirements. So basically, you are of good character, or you can demonstrate you are of good character despite having any sort of criminal record. Obviously, another thing is not receiving a complaint to the department that you've contravened, or the employer's contravened paying for visa sponsorship requirement, so that the employer has actually paid for all the fees, associated fees with these visas. Another requirement, which is very important, and it's in most visas as well, is you meet the minimum standards of English language proficiency. And for, let's say, a temporary work visa, which is the 482 skills in demand visa, it's roughly like if you're a citizen of any of the main Western countries, that you meet that requirement, and it's a little bit like less strict than it's less stricter than other visa types. So if you can prove you've done 5 years of full-time study in at least a secondary level institution, that will meet the requirement. Otherwise, things like the IELTS test, if you're familiar with it, a minimum of 5 across the whole score band is sufficient. So yeah, that's pretty much it with the work visas in a nutshell. I'll just leave it there because we've come to the half-hour mark.
Thank you, Gunnar, for the presentation. I'll just share his details on screen, so at least you have them handy. Just a reminder that the information that Gunnar has shared is general information only. So if you do have any specific queries about your circumstances, whether you wish to, employ someone overseas because you are an employer, or you wish to migrate to Australia under this regime, please speak to someone that has the knowledge in this space, preferably a lawyer or migration agent that's familiar with the processes. Just a reminder, the session is being recorded, so if you have joined late, you can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel a bit later today, moving forward. And there's also a one-page handout that Gunnar has prepared, so I'll share that. I'll share that by email with those that are registered through Eventbrite, and you'll have that one-page document handy for your use, or you can share it with family and friends as you wish. All right, so we'll jump into Q&A, and just kind of we'll just want to take a step back on this process. If you can just explain maybe to our audience, had a few questions sort of come through around if someone would just want to, they're on a business, they want to employ someone, they can't find local talent, so they're looking overseas. Just practically, what are the high-level steps they need to follow? What should they do? Should they do it themselves? Should they go online, or should they engage a professional like yourself? Just what are the sort of the high-level steps they should sort of consider to navigate the process?
Yeah, no, very good question.
Mm.
If you're overseas, you'll probably your best bet to be able to find an employer that could possibly employ you is to try to seek the services of a reputable recruitment agency. That way, that connection can be made between yourself and the employer. Because what I find is a lot of the work visas or the employers kind of look for people that they can physically see, and it's usually the overseas workers that are currently here. So for them to be able to trust yourself to be able to then make that financial commitment, it would be good to have like an agency, perhaps, or someone, um, or someone that the employer knows to have that trust to make that leap to get you on board. That would be my advice to someone overseas. When it comes, I saw a question about reputable agencies. I'm not completely familiar, but I have spoken to some recruitment people, and they said that the best way is to jump on Google and look and specifically search for a recruitment agency in that particular industry. So, like, if you're looking for a recruitment agency that specializes in chefs in Australia, then do type that in on Google and see what searches come up. And I'm sure there'll be some sort of recruitment agent that can give you more information about that. But yeah, in Australia, always best to speak to your employer. If they're already working with an immigration lawyer or agent, they'll tell you that we need to go through a process. If not, just let them know that there's a process that needs to be followed, and best to speak to an agent or lawyer because, generally speaking, the employer will have done a lot of these because it's not something that's, I guess, would be common practice for them, and there's a lot of money on the line as well for them. So if they're not very experienced in it, it's good that they get that advice from the lawyer agent and yourself as well.
Yeah. Just in relation to that question about recruitment agencies, you can't sort of give any recommendations or make any suggestions, but I guess again, if you're overseas, you can speak to your local embassy, or you can contact industry bodies in Australia that represent, I guess, the industry that you wish to get into, and just through general searches and speaking to people. I just wanted to ask a question about standard business sponsor rights. You talk about them having to be vetted and approved. What sort of assurances can the employee, that's the potential employee that's wanting to, engage with them, sort of seek assurance that this employer is approved? Because there's a lot of sham, sort of activities that go around, and you through the media. Is there a list of, like, of standard business, like, how can they verify whether the employee is a standard business sponsor or not?
Yeah, it's a very good question because I actually came across a list from the Australian Border Force of register of sanctioned sponsors. So
Right.
um,
So there's a
there is
negative
actually,
list, but not a positive list. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, there's actually unfortunately a negative list of employers
Mm.
that lost their sponsorship status because they may have not fulfilled their obligation requirements. But
Mm.
usually the way to verify is if the employer is actually a accredited sponsor, they will have a copy of the letter from the Department of Home Affairs stating that they received their standard sponsor status on this date. and it's valid till X number of years. You can just ask your employer to just have a look at that, and then they can show you a copy of it, so that you have a peace of mind. That would be the way forward, and then you can always go on that list. List is not safe. They're on the sanctioned list.
Yeah, and I guess there is comfort in knowing that the visas are issued not by the employer but by the department. So if that employer was a bit dodgy or was on the sanction list or didn't have the right accreditation to do so, you probably wouldn't get the visa anyway. But no, it's a good point. And Gunnar, just in relation to, you talked about these lists, right? These occupation lists and all that. Do they change regularly? Is it based off, the demand for skills that the government sees at a particular point in time? Are they pretty static? So what sort of comfort do employers have when they want to, seek employment? That, the skill that they have will be there in a few months' time or whatnot? Like how dynamic is this list?
It is quite dynamic. Immigration law itself is dynamic as well. So it's always good to have a look at the occupation list. Just always double check. Fortunately, no agent or lawyer can say for sure that occupation will always be your gateway to what you want to achieve, because there has been instances in the past where the political parties have changed and they've completely overhauled the system or the occupation list, and have basically changed it. So there was occupations that allowed you to get permanent residence, then they removed it or they added it back. So there is those risks as well. But I guess that's sort of out of everyone's control, and you can just only hope that that sort of thing doesn't happen too often by the government.
Mm. And if you are an employer, Gunnar, that's wanting to seek the services of someone abroad, and they go down this pathway, just on average, I'm sure you've done this in the past, like what are sort of what are the costs that you're looking at end to end, including getting representation and support and all that? Like, this is a small investment, a large investment? Can you give any sort of insights into that?
Yeah, I would say on average, the employer would have to probably invest about 10 to 12,000 Australian dollars. This is just for, let's say, one of the visas. So it could be that you have to apply for both the temporary and then later the permanent visa, which would approximately be double the amount. Some employees may be fortunate where it will just be there's a particular permanent work visa where it's called a direct entry stream. It's the 186 visa. If you meet that requirement, then you can just go straight to permanent residency and not have to go through the temporary then permanent residency route. But yeah, you're looking at roughly the sponsor fees and the nomination fee itself is probably roughly around $800 that the employer would have to pay the government. But then there's this levy that the employer would have to pay the government. It's like a training levy where the government uses it to train the Australian labour market, to increase labourers in the market. That could be anywhere between 4 to 6 grand that the employer would have to pay, because the fees are set depending on how many years the visa is going to be, which the employer can select. And then the lawyer, the visa application itself, the fee for that by the government is roughly about $3,500. And then you have like the lawyer or agent fees, which can vary between 3,500 to 5,500, roughly around there.
Right. Okay. So it's definitely a sizable investment. It's not, something that you want to throw money at if you don't really need it. So definitely something to bear in mind. And we've got the question. I'll just jump to the questions that are in the public chat. Ghana, but does every employer need to register with the government before getting the permit to hire from overseas? I think the answer is yes. If you need to be that, you need to be a standard business sponsor. Yeah, if you want to do that. Is that right, Ghana?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. They need to be registered first before they can hire overseas people. That's correct.
Yeah, and then I think the second question about is there a golden list of employers? I think that was previously raised. Right, there isn't a sort of a positive. There isn't a list. There's a list of those that are on the sanction, but I guess there isn't sort of a list. Kind of, if I'm wrong, of those that do have that accreditation to sponsor. Is that right?
No, there is no list like that per se, but there is like
Mm.
a list of employers that you can potentially um, seek their assistance when it comes to this particular regional work visa, where the requirements are easier and it's like a designated. It's called the Dharma scheme, so it's like a designated area migration, designated something migration area, and yeah, they've just basically made it easier for employers to employ people because they're in a more rural area. And then they've got a list of employers that are actually accredited for that. So that's a whole
Right.
different thing, and they can ask their a lawyer or advisor to give them more information about that.
Okay, so if you're seeking employment in Australia in sort of, I guess, industries with employers in a regional or rural area, then there's this Dharma list maybe that you want to look into. And um, yeah, but it is a bit, you would think that if someone has that accreditation, that sponsorship status, it'd be pretty easy for the government just to put a list up, right, and sort of make it clear who they are and when their accreditation, expires and all that sort of stuff. Like it wouldn't take that long to get a list publicly available, and that sort of gives comfort to those that are overseas that they're sort of dealing with someone who's got the right accreditation.
Yeah, that would have been
Yeah.
handy.
All right. We'll just go through some of the other questions that we've got. These figures that you've provided, the thresholds, and I assume these sort of change year in, year out, right? They're not sort of static numbers, right? They'll move at the time. So important for people that are relying on that information to check in um, periodically to make sure those thresholds don't change the dollar amounts. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. It automatically increases every year. I think every financial year. But the for example, like there was an overhaul of this work visa scheme. I think the minimum wage only a few years ago, if I'm not wrong, about 5 years ago, was around 50 to 55,000. So then there was this after the overhaul, was just major, increase
Mm.
to the income threshold to like 76,000. So anything can happen.
Yes, I think it's wise to check it all.
Definitely.
Um, and just on these thresholds, you're saying excluding superannuation. Kind of what about sort of incentives and rarely does someone just get you know just the wage. It's always plus other things that get put into the package, I guess, from a salary perspective. Are those other bits and pieces included in that, or is it just the basic wage that needs to meet that threshold?
Um, yeah, there is allowance for non-monetary benefits, and depending on the value of those, then that can be included in the sort of salary package and the base salary. So it can non-monetary benefits can make up that base salary
Yeah,
basically.
understood. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, so it can be contributing towards that threshold. Yeah, all
exactly.
right. And just on the strict obligations in that last slide that you sort of spoke about the requirements, sort of can the government just audit an employer whenever they want, or request information? Like sort of stringent are they like how stringent do you need to be as an employer to keep these records accurate? Otherwise, you might face consequences if you can't sort of answer their questions or provide the documentation. Can they just audit you like the employer at any time?
Yeah, so they can do randomly audit, and we don't know like which industry may be targeted. it's based on information or intel that they get that we wouldn't know. If there's information that's been given to them about certain industry where it's wreaking havoc, then they will target those industries. I have in that sanctioned list seen things like there's restaurants, there's I think just like probably transport, logistics, even nursing agency, bakeries, breweries. You know, your whole list of things, different type of businesses. So yeah, it's just if you feel like your employer doesn't do their paperwork too well, that might be some alarm bells. Something you probably want to speak at the outset with them, um, just so that you make sure, yeah, it just doesn't cause you or the employer an issue. There's good practices, standard practices when it comes to the record keeping and just the usual things that other Australian businesses should be doing anyway.
Yeah, that's right, because they've got other obligations to the tax office and other sort of regulators. So definitely. All right, we'll now jump to the next part. I think we'll just thank you so much, Gunnar, for presenting today. His details are on screen. If you do have any specific questions about your circumstances, you can contact him and he can help you in that respect. That brings us to the end of the session now. So thank you all for joining. If you have joined late, you can watch the entire session on our YouTube channel. We record every session and it all gets uploaded for viewing after today. There's also a one-page handout which Gunnar has prepared, and I'll share that with registered participants by email. If you've enjoyed watching today's session, please share it with anyone that you think might benefit from it. And you can follow us on the social media and YouTube and all the other places as you wish. And we look forward to seeing you at a future session. So with that in mind, thank you, Gunnar, for your time. And hopefully everyone has learned something today. So that brings us to the end. And I'll close the session now. Bye for now.